So I'm going to kick it off just by saying good evening, everyone. There are 53 people right now who have joined us as attendees. So they're here to hear and pose questions about this development. We all know which development we're here for, but I'm sure Daniel will take us through that. My name is Jeff Leeper. I'm the City Councilor for the neighborhood. And tonight I just wanted to say a couple more things than I usually do at these. I do want residents to know right off the bat that the the large majority of the feedback that I've been getting on this proposal has been against it. I am going to represent you on this file. I'm going to be opposing it, and I'm going to be asking my colleagues at council to oppose it as well. And the developer knows this, and I've started talking to some of my colleagues about it already. This one will be interesting. There's some layers of complexity that aren't necessarily in many of the development applications that we are currently being flooded with in the ward. You are all, or many of you are aware that this was the subject of a long OMB discussion with the decision that came out in 2014. So in that OMB decision, the height on a site was capped to 8 stories. I'm not going to get too deep into the technicalities of it. And I'm getting a lot of questions now about, sorry, somebody's calling me. I'm getting a lot of questions now about why are they allowed to apply for this. And I just wanted to give you my perspective on what is likely to become sort of the central questions of this development application as it moves its way through the City Council planning process. I expect that what we're going to hear tonight is that in 2014, the official plan changed. There was an amendment to the official plan, OPA 150, that drives greater height and density to transit stations. And I expect that what we are going to hear tonight is that that is at least a good chunk of the basis upon which Uniform is pressing forward with this development. In terms of planning, everyone knows that the province gives the city its marching orders. That's called the provincial policy statement. And every city in Ontario has a responsibility to create an official plan that describes how we are going to grow according to the official plan, or the provincial policy statement. The provincial policy statement says a lot of different things. One of the most critical for us here tonight is that the province has instructed cities in Ontario to grow near transit lines. And so we have an official plan that in 2014 was changed to say we're going to drive height and density to transit stations. I'm simplifying a lot here. I think so the developer is going to come forward presumably with a request to change the secondary plan, and their argument is going to be that the 8-story limit is inappropriate to the newly amended 2014 official plan. And what is going to be in front of council is going to be a series of decisions. The first decision that we're going to have to make is, should we amend the secondary plan in order to allow this development to move forward? Then, if council were to determine that that is appropriate, in order to say, look, the secondary plan needs to be changed in order to accommodate the kind of development that the official plan develops, then we get into whether or not this particular built form is suitable. Is this height appropriate in light of the official plan? Is the traffic implications, are those acceptable in light of the official plan? I'm not going to get too deep into my own line of argument because it is going to take me some time and feedback and discussion to fully flesh out. But that basically is what City Council is going to have to determine. Should we change the secondary plan? If we choose to change the secondary plan, it's going to be because we agree with the developer that it is more appropriate for our most recent official plan. And then should we rezone in this very sort of site-specific context? So that's basically it. I know tonight we have Steve Gauthier who is with us, who is the city planner. We ask him to attend these meetings. I'll just say it is, this is a meeting that I'm hosting. It's not an official meeting. It's not a city meeting, but I do ask the city planner assigned to the file to sit in on these meetings to hear the feedback. So Steve is here in the aftermath of this open house. That's when the work begins to start crafting arguments to the planner and to City Council to sway them one way or the other. Steve will ultimately make a recommendation to the Planning Committee, which will make a recommendation to City Council as to whether to allow this or not. So I do want to say right off the top, I am going to support you residents who are opposed to this building. You know, I know that the 8-story limit that was described in the OMB hearing is on the table. That can change. It is not immutable. City Council has a responsibility to hear this application, and it's going to have to determine whether or not to change the secondary plan and change the zoning for this property. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Fiona, who can describe how this meeting is going to unfold in terms of housekeeping, and then she will introduce Dan with the development team.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. So for tonight, shortly I'm going to turn it over to the applicants team. They're going to run through a presentation. They're going to share a screen, so there's a PowerPoint with some images that you'll be able to see. After that, we're going to move into a Q&A. So at any time during the conversation, you can submit questions. If you take your mouse to the bottom of your screen, you should see 3 buttons: chat, raise hand, and Q&A. The only one you're going to use tonight is Q&A. If you click it, you can type in a question, and then they will appear in a queue for me. And then when we're ready for your question, we'll answer it by clicking this button. Hopefully you see this test question that I've just put up right now. One of the panelists will answer the question, and then we'll click done, and it moves into a different area. We will also be monitoring the Q&A as it keeps going, and if we see some repeated questions or maybe just a question for Jeff, depending on what it is, we can also type answers. So some questions may receive a written response if we don't feel like it's necessary for everyone to have that info, if it's something very nuanced and minute. I'm also going to be paying attention to repeated questions just for the sake of time. So if you've asked a question, I may be asking a similar question just so that we're not going over the same things over and over again. I'm also going to be paying attention to who is submitting the questions, just to, in the interest of fairness, to try and give everyone, you know, during the first round, get everyone's questions out, and then moving into a second round, we can definitely hit repeat people. We'll go for as long as the questions last, but we'll cut things off absolutely at 9 o'clock. And if questions run out beforehand, then obviously we'll end things a little bit earlier. If you have a comment about the webinar or something that you feel like you want to talk to me, you can also put it in the Q&A. That's how I can read your feedback. You can also submit comments. Again, for the interest of time, I may not read every single comment. As Jeff said, this application is submitted and on circulation right now. So following this meeting, we definitely encourage you to submit feedback to Steve Gauthier, the lead planner, as well as to our office via email. And any questions that you didn't get the chance to ask, shoot us an email afterwards and we'll absolutely get you that information. And finally, this is being recorded and we've just set up our YouTube channel. So shortly afterwards, we will throw this up on YouTube so you can circulate this to any neighbors or review anything later on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan to introduce the applicants team. Dan.
Well, great, Fiona, and thanks for setting up the meeting tonight. We appreciate you pulling it together in short order. Thanks also to Jeff. My name is Dan Tomka. I'm the VP of High Rise with Uniform Developments. I'll be heading up the development at 335 Roosevelt. We're happy to be here tonight. Before I begin, I want to take a moment and introduce the other members of the project team on the call. As I call your name, maybe you could raise your hand just to identify yourself. I'm looking to my right, the screen's on the right, so and the camera's in front of me. So Emily Myers from our office at Uniform is with me. Brian Casagrande from Fotan Planners is on the call. Jacob Bolduc is on the call from Fotan Planners. Rial Labelle from Hoban Architects is on the call, and Barry Hoban, I see there, is also on the call. Jennifer Luong, our traffic specialist, is also on the call from Novatech Engineering. So Jeff has set the stage, so I thought maybe before I begin, just a little perspective from Uniform. It's been a few years since you heard from us, and I thought I would just take a few moments and really clarify why we're moving forward with the project now. So much has changed in Ottawa over the last 5 years. There's been a strong population growth in Ottawa, and it's forecast to continue. Much has been changed, there's been much debate around whether they should expand the urban boundary or intensify the core. Most participants would acknowledge that intensification of the core is an important part of this managing the growth. The city has made a large financial commitment to building out the Confederation Line LRT, which includes Dominion Station. The official plan is being amended and is supportive of intensification around transit stations. The secondary plan is also under review, as Jeff has mentioned. The provincial policy statement has recently been updated in 2020 and continues or increasingly is supportive around intensifying around transit stations. Our site is very close to the Dominion Station, about 180 meters. We're one of the few sites in the around Dominion Station gives an opportunity to meaningfully expand or intensify around that and support that transit node. With vacancies low in the Westboro area, we think there's a need for apartments, and that's what we're proposing tonight. So with all of that, we've spent considerable time over the last couple of years redesigning this project. It looks much different than the original design. We've added a number of things, and we're going to talk about that tonight. So we think it's time this site got cleaned up and redeveloped. The time is right also to safely allow access between Winston, Wilmot, and Dominion Station through this project. Currently, it's people are not able to get through there and have to go around. The Dominion Station portion of the LRT is scheduled to be coming online in 2025. Much work has to happen between now and then to bring this project forward. So I ask you one thing tonight. Just please listen and observe and hear our presentation with an open mind. And just really take a hard look at what we're trying to do here, because we think it has a lot of merits, notwithstanding Jeff's previous comments. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brian Casagrande and Jacob, and they'll take you through the planning rationale to start off with. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to share my screen now and provide a visual of our presentation. Can everybody confirm that they can see it?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. So once again, my name is Jacob Bolduc. I'm a planner with Fotan Consultants. I'm joined by Brian Casagrande, and we're going to provide you a brief overview of the application from a planning perspective. And afterwards, I'll turn it over to Hoban Architecture to run you through more of the design. So once again, this is the project team. We've got Dan, Brian and myself, Barry and Rayal, and also Jennifer to answer any transportation questions. I'll run you through, I don't want to overlap too much with what Councillor Leeper said, but for those of you who may be a little unfamiliar with the development review process, this slide provides an overview of the planning applications required for such a development. An amendment to the official plan is required to amend Schedule C2 of the secondary plan to permit an increase to the maximum building height. An amendment to the zoning bylaw is required to permit an increase to the maximum building height and also to allow for other site-specific standards, most notably some of the required setbacks. And finally, a site plan control application will be required, but has not been submitted at this time. A site plan control application is a more detailed development package, including civil engineering drawings, landscaping elements, and other technical design considerations prior to obtaining building permits. Moving on, this is a copy of the site plan, and I provided some of the basic project statistics. Rayal from Hoban Architecture will be providing a more detailed presentation, as I just said. The site plan is displayed on screen, and on the upper right side, you will see that the east tower has a total height of 18 stories, and on the upper left corner of the site, towards the middle of the screen, is the west tower, having a height of 21 stories. At the bottom, or the south side of the site plan, you will see there are 4 low-rise residential buildings, all of which are 3 stories tall. As you can see, the subject property is bisected by a pedestrian promenade at the end of Winston Avenue, providing direct access to the multi-use pathway on the south side of the transitway. What is currently known as the future Dominion LRT station, though I understand the name may change, is located, like we said, approximately 180 meters west of the subject site, and will be accessible via a pedestrian pathway at the end of Roosevelt Avenue, much like the current one in place. I know Councillor Leeper already spoke a little bit about the PPS, but I think for the planning discussion, I'd like to begin there. The PPS is effectively the province's high-level policy document with regards to development and growth within our communities. The PPS was previously required to be updated every 10 years, but recently it was changed to every 5 years in order to better equip municipalities with policy direction for our rapidly growing urban communities. Several policies remain the same from version to version, and others get small updates to their wording, and sometimes new sections or subsections are created. As you can see in this table, we have compared 2 of the most relevant sections of the PPS across the last 3 versions from 2005 to 2020. Changes in the language provide clear guidance as to how municipalities are directed to accommodate growth to ensure we create healthy, livable, and safe communities. For example, a new subsection was introduced under Section 1.4 Housing, requiring planning authorities to consider a range of housing options and densities to meet projected market-based and affordable housing needs, including requiring approval authorities to consider transit supportive densities and prioritizing intensification in proximity to transit stations and major transit corridors. So while the 2014 PPS and to an extent the 2005 PPS did discuss transit, you can see that a new subsection has been introduced, providing a little bit more focus on transit supportive development under the 2020 PPS. Another fun way to gauge the general policy direction is to take a look at the frequency of key terms within these documents. Transit, intensification, and market-based are all terms that have seen more use in the PPS over the years as the province tries to accommodate growth in core urban areas and support alternative modes of transportation, especially when municipalities have invested so much in transit. I'll walk you briefly through the existing context of the official plan and secondary plans. So the subject property is designated general urban area, which applies to the vast majority of the city within the Greenbelt. The policies generally permit a maximum height of 4 stories, but opportunities for greater height can be achieved where sites meet the intent of the criteria. The policies seek to ensure intensification is compatible with the existing scale and pattern of development, while also considering new opportunities to increase the mix of unit types and the tenureship to ensure the needs of people from all ages, incomes, and backgrounds are met. In addition to the official plan, the secondary plan was approved in 2009. The city was undertaking a review of the secondary plan, but this process has been put on hold and has now been combined with the city's new official plan. The secondary plan generally anticipates the greatest heights will be located near Westboro Transit Station, being high-rise buildings to support the city's transit-oriented goals. At the moment, a maximum building height of 8 stories is permitted across most of the subject site as a result of that previously discussed Ontario Municipal Board decision. To touch briefly on the new official plan, which we had mentioned, the City of Ottawa is working hard and we're expecting to get a first look in the fall of 2020. The city has produced some working principles and some guiding documents. Some of those principles are known as the 5 big moves. They generally seek to achieve a more growth by intensification, support sustainable transportation modes, provide good urbanism for all building types and scales, provide for a more resilient city, and one that continues to grow in employment through economic development. As part of this, the city is introducing some new concepts, namely nodes, corridors, and neighborhoods. Specifically with regards to nodes, they are transit-oriented areas that are intended to support the greatest intensification and densities. So once again, the applications are being considered under the current policy framework, but as planners, it's always important to take a look at what's coming and make sure that new development aligns with future goals. I'll touch briefly on the zoning towards the end of my presentation. So as you can see on the map, the majority of the site is zoned R5, with the properties to the south that I previously pointed out currently being zoned R3. The intent of the proposed development is to generally maintain the intent of these zones, being to allow high-rise development within the R5 and low-rise ground-oriented development within the existing R3 areas. The low-rise areas on the south side provide a positive built form transition to the existing community to the south between the site and Richmond Road. They provide separation from the proposed towers while also providing a ground-oriented facade along the existing streetscapes of Roosevelt, Wilmot, and Winston. When taking a look and working through the policy and regulatory environment, we developed sort of key design themes, and this is where I'll pass it over to Rael to kind of walk you through the design philosophy. But these themes generally guide the development and include previous elements that have been pointed out, including the pedestrian promenade, connecting transit and cycling, the animation of the streetscape and other green spaces, and so on. So I'll pass it off now to my colleague Rael at Hoban Architecture to provide some context and their design philosophy for the proposed development.
Thank you, Jacob. Hello, everyone. And Jacob, is there any way you can just maximize that view? Maybe go full screen? There you go. Yep.
Thanks.
No problem. Thank you. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us this evening. So I'm going to cover a little bit of I'm not going to get into the design details of this thing, but I'm going to stay at a high level and hope to go through some of these design themes to help guide some of the conversation that's going to happen in the next few minutes, and hopefully some of your answer some of your questions, and if not, then we can clarify those things as we keep going. So just very quickly, I use this view here, gives us a pretty broad perimeter of the site, extending all the way to the recently completed Minto high-rise to the west, and then coming in just west of Berkeley with the existing mid and high-rise buildings that are sprinkled along that edge of the residential zone, and then coming into our site at the center, and then just east of our site, the 7-story building that you're very familiar with, and then some more a flurry of low-rise, mid-rise, and extending all the way to the east to the Minto high-rise. So there's a variety of housing types and built form that exists in the neighborhood. And here we are today, just next to what will become the Phase 2 LRT transit station, a site that you're all familiar with. I'm not going to go through, oh, Jacob, you're controlling the slides. So next slide, please. Again, this was a quick walk around the perimeter of the site, going down, starting over on Winston, extending east along Wilmot, and then north and coming along the north side of the property. These are just captures, photo captures, highlighting the existing site conditions. Next. Again, describing a little bit of what I just spoke to, what's happening in the distance along the horizon, the variety of housing types and built form. Next. And coming along the north side, the north edge of the property, similarly capturing, again, the horizon and some of the flurry of housing typologies and height that exists around. Next. And the west side of the property along Roosevelt. Next. So these themes, these 10 themes, I'm going to go through in detail, highlighting how the project integrates itself with the surrounding context and how we've done that. Next. Looking at the site access, loading, garbage, and some of the main residential entrances. This diagram basically highlights where the activity is happening. So starting off on Winston, we've got loading and access to our parking garage, which is tucked to the south of the buildings into the site so that there are no visible views of these back of house. There's also the extension of the street, Winston, through the site. And then the residential entrances are off of Roosevelt, as well as, again, in behind the southern building on the west facade, the east building. And then we've got a flurry of low-rise buildings that span along Winston, Wilmot, and Roosevelt that has residential access points there as well. Next. This is just another aerial view, the site plan, highlighting some of the things I just talked about. We've got our pedestrian circulation going through the site and connecting to the main entrances of each of the buildings. We've got our loading access that I spoke to earlier. We have two parking ramps that are going into the parking garage. One comes off of Roosevelt that gets tucked underneath one of the low-rise buildings. And the other ramp comes in behind the east building and extends down into the parking garage from there. Again, they are tucked away out of sight and neatly so that there's no visible link to the overhead doors or any of those things. The loading spaces are also tucked away, again, on the south of both the west building and the east building. We've got a major outdoor amenity public realm that exists around the perimeter of the buildings that's highlighted in the green areas. We have over 55% of the footprint is actually open space. Next. This aerial view again highlights those loading areas that I spoke to. So just south of the east tower and again to the south of the west tower on the bottom of the screen there, coming off of Winston, the major pedestrian link that connects through the site to the MUP, which takes you to the LRT station, and the MUP that extends west and east, of course. Next. This is a visual of the parking garage infrastructure. I spoke about the ramp access points. Each level has approximately 160 spaces, and we're looking at the total parking capacity now of being distributed across 1 or 2 parking levels. Next. This is a view from Winston Avenue that shows you the connection to the residential entrance for the East Tower, connecting from that major pedestrian link coming through the site at the center. Next. Another view of the main entrances from Roosevelt, connecting you, one entrance connects you to the low rise and the other entrance actually connects you to the high rise building. And we create a little bit of a pavilion building on the front of the high rise building to sort of create scale along that residential street. And you can see to the left, we have our MUP and our bridge that connects to the LRT station from this view. Next. Now, the central space I described earlier is comprised of, as I mentioned, there's a pedestrian link that takes you through. So there's essentially this street extension, which is 18 meters wide, which matches the current easement of Winston. And that street easement is made up of a 3-meter building setback, 3.5 meter pathway, a 2.5 meter tree buffer between the pathway and the driveway that takes you into the site to access parking and loading. And then another 3-meter setback along the edge of that driveway to the low-rise buildings. there's a 40-meter setback between the buildings, between the high-rise buildings, which almost doubles the minimum requirement, city requirement. Next. The podium and materiality, this entire development prides itself with a really strong podium and the low-rise buildings that are set in behind to the south to sort of knit itself into the existing neighborhood in terms of scale, height, texture, patterning. All of these things help to kind of create a sensible approach to the design. Next. So the building features an appropriately scaled podium, as I mentioned. It's programmed with amenity spaces at the ground level. There's over 10,000 square feet of amenity. The building step back above, which significantly reduces the footprint from 10,000 square feet at the ground level to 6,500 square feet at the top, which again is about 10% less than what the minimum standard is under the city guidelines. There's a unique design opportunity here that we've captured, a really strong podium base, a middle, and a top, which again recedes and reduces its footprint by another 20%. Next. So this building design features two unique approaches to its architecture. One faces the river, and the other faces the residential neighborhood and the traditional Main Street on Richmond. We use the north elevation facing the river is designed to be lighter in color with a combination of stacked masonry panels and light colored architectural metal panels. The south on the elevation is proposed to contrast the north with a darker mahogany colored masonry profile. The two towers step back and rest atop that 4-story podium, which extend around the perimeter of the site. The podium is designed to contrast the tower, and it's lined with a large masonry format in a light buff color. Next. So the character of Wilmot, as you know it, is a low-rise. And what we've done is Uniform has actually acquired some land. And in order to help knit this development into its context, so we have 11-meter height, 3-story buildings with about 38 units located within these, within this, what we're calling a reinvented street wall, if you will. Family. And we are gearing these to a family unit type. So depending on its construction type, this unit type would allow to target a more family-oriented market with possibly a wood frame construction. Next. Another view from Winston and capturing Wilmot, just turning towards the east. So this proposed development includes this bold public feature at the heart of the site, which we talked about. Just over 40 meters of building separation created between these two towers, and providing a really great opportunity to connect the neighborhood with the development site, through the development site, and with the LRT station. Next. So here's a view of from the west looking east. Again, we're looking at the LRT station on the bottom right-hand corner and the proximity to the site. And visibly in this image, you can again get a glimpse of the 4-story podium and the 3-story low-rise buildings and how everything creates a bit of a datum. And that is essentially the street wall that's created around the perimeter of the site. And then above, significant step backs in order to sit and rest the high-rise profile buildings. Next. The ground floor plan here is designed, as I mentioned earlier, with a over 10,000 square feet of amenity space. There's also, on top of that, there are outdoor amenity spaces that animate the perimeter of the building's podiums that face onto the open spaces to the north of the property line, as well as there are outdoor spaces that are planned for the eastern and western side yards in order to help promote an active and secure outdoor space across the entire site. Next. We talked about diversity of house form, the opportunity here for this proposal to be designed to knit into the existing neighborhood context using a total of 4 low-rise 3-story buildings. Talked about the idea, opportunity for the construction of these unit types that may allow for larger family-oriented unit types to be focused within the housing typology at a more affordable rate. Next. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, so are you folks done with the presentation? Do you want to say anything else before I turn it over to Jeff?
We're actually going to flip it back to Emily at Uniform right now, who's going to give us a bit of a closing statement.
Okay.
Sorry, thanks. Can you hear me, guys?
Yes.
All right, so I'm just going to have a very short soundbite here. I know, that what I'm about to say is not necessarily going to sway opinion, but at the same time, I think it's really important information to convey in this setting. I think it's important to know the people and the organizations behind these proposals. I think that's relevant. Uniform Urban Developments, along with the Hoban team, has been building in Ottawa for over 25 years. We're a locally owned and operated company, and we've built a great deal of brand equity in the city of Ottawa with our efforts over these 25, nearly 30 years. Again, with Barry's team from day one, we've designed, proposed, and completed numerous award-winning infill developments, specifically within Westboro. I appreciate that this particular vision is certainly different in scale and scope to our other infills that Westboro is familiar with, infill developments that are ongoing right now. But as it has been said, we feel this site is different. It's different in terms of its attributes, its walkability. It truly is the 15-minute community location that we've been hearing about in ongoing official plan discussions. And undoubtedly the proximity to a multi-billion-dollar rapid transit system that the city is presently operating and expanding. It's an undeniable feature of this site. It's different in the opportunity it represents for Ottawa in the year 2020. And this is a city that's counting on intensification to realize its new official plan and its transit goals. So, it's the same team that's been working together for 3 decades that's doing some of the best design and build work in this city that's bringing this proposal forward to you. We're motivated by the planning policies of today. We're motivated to do good business, and we want to put our name on a development that's sophisticated and forward thinking. And, we appreciate this opportunity to have a dialogue with the community. And, this is one of the first steps. So I think I give it back to Fiona. Jeff?
Sounds good.
Jeff?
Thank you very much. Just before Fiona begins to ask, and sorry, I should have said Fiona Mitchell is, of course, my rockstar planning assistant, who is making all the magic happen tonight. I just wanted to say there are now 76 attendees. I've had questions before about who's in the room. I just want to say I recognize a number of immediate neighbors to the development. I recognize both Douglas James and Saeed Sayeh, who are senior planning officials at the city, who are also listening in. I see Heather Mitchell, who is with the Westboro Community Association. If you are not engaged with the Westboro Community Association and are interested in this development, I would suggest that you give them a drop them a line. I see that Judy Lincoln from the Westboro Village BIA is here as well. And there are some other folks who are involved in the development industry generally in Ottawa who are keeping an eye on what their competition is doing, presumably. No, it's this is obviously a very controversial development, and I know the planning folks will be following this closely. So I just wanted to give you that idea. There are 76 people besides the panelists who are currently on your screen. Fiona, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move into the Q&A. I have 18 questions already. Oh, 19, but feel free to ask questions as we go through. So first question, sorry. How can Roosevelt handle the traffic, particularly in conjunction with the other developments proposed on Roosevelt? Example, to replace the Tubman's Funeral Home.
Jennifer, you can take that question.
I'll jump in on that one for sure. So I'm not sure how many people are aware, have been on the city's DevOps tool to see the studies that are prepared in support of the application, but there is a traffic study available there. And the traffic study is under review currently by the city, but it does detail how much traffic by all modes would be generated by the development, as well as the existing traffic out there and other development applications that are in or currently under construction. So you can find all those details there. But specifically about Roosevelt, what we see is in terms of peak hour traffic, two-way peak hour traffic currently on Roosevelt is in the order of 110 vehicles an hour. And just to give you a sense of what that number is, the city has a threshold where they will consider area traffic management studies. If issues are raised, you know, there are complaints or problems with volume or speed on a road that it shouldn't be. And the threshold for a local class road, such as Roosevelt, is 1,000 vehicles per day or 120 vehicles per hour during that peak hour. So as I say, currently on Roosevelt, at the intersection with Richmond, it's around 110. So this development we've projected in terms of car traffic is meant to add likely in the order of 20 vehicles an hour, which by the way is about one vehicle every maybe 3 or 4 minutes. And so we are pushing that threshold, bringing it to 130, so just over that threshold. So that threshold is when we may begin to consider if a study is necessary or not. To give you a sense in terms of capacity of a road, the lane capacity of a local road is considered to be around 400 vehicles an hour, so we're not pushing capacity in that sense. And also, the intersection analysis that we've done right at that intersection of Roosevelt and Richmond shows that the level of service is still projected to be quite good. It's in the order of B or C. So still spare capacity available there. So we do show in the traffic study that there is capacity on the road for the vehicle traffic that is anticipated. We have anticipated a very high transit modal split as well as active transportation.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Sorry, I meant to mention this earlier, just in case folks have to go as time continues. This application is on DevOps, so if you go to the City of Ottawa DevOps site and you search 335 Roosevelt, you will find the full application details, as well as Steve Gauthier's contact information. So if you want to review things further, please check it out on DevOps, and again, send us feedback afterwards. Okay.
If I could just add to Jennifer's comment, there is also, I mentioned two points of access to the site. So it's not all coming down Roosevelt, or it's not all, I mean, they're divided between Winston and Roosevelt. As well as there's some surface parking on the site to try and relieve some of the on-street parking that may occur.
Okay, would anyone else like to add anything to this question? Okay.
Well, overall, on the parking, our view is many people will take the LRT. In fact, we're going to encourage people use the LRT and bicycles and walking and whatnot. For a great many people, cars are really a weekend event. Should they want to visit family or friends, a one-off. We're strongly supportive of the LRT, and we see the garage, the cars being parked in the garage, really as storage lockers for the cars.
Okay. Anyone else on this question before I go on to the next one? Okay. Why has Uniform left the Fendor site in such a deplorable state? It is an eyesore and a potential hazard to public safety.
Well, I'll take that question. The good news is we are in the process of removing the buildings shortly. We're just getting ready to get geared up for that. So you'll see a noticeable improvement. Bear in mind that over the last few years, there was great uncertainty over what we would do with this land. We have tried to maintain fencing, and we had a tenant in there that was actively occupying it, a contractor, a landscape contractor that was moving stuff around. We were cutting grass and trying where we could. These are very old industrial buildings. And at this point, we just weren't in a position to do a massive demolition, costly demolition, till we could clarify the outcome of the land. So we hope to get it cleaned up. I share with you your concerns, and we'll be on it.
Thank you, Dan. Next question. How many parking spaces will be part of this development, both above ground and underground?
Maybe Riel, you could take that.
We got that. Yep, thanks, Dan.
To be finalized.
So we're still working through the numbers, but as it currently stands, we've got approximately 10 parking spaces on the surface, and below grade, I mentioned earlier, we have approximately 160 spaces on each level, but we're currently targeting a total of 311 spaces at the moment. So that yields the minimum requirement for visitor parking spaces, as well as actually exceeds the visitor parking space requirements, and meets a one per unit demand on the development. One parking space per unit.
Expensive to build. We don't need. We're not going to build. We're not going to build it.
And I should mention that also Uniform is looking. It was mentioned earlier in the presentation that there's an incentive program. We're trying to incentivize the use of the LRT. Uniform isn't looking to build more parking than it needs in order to meet its marketing demands. And really, this is going to become a bit of an exercise to just analyze exactly how much parking they're willing to build and are going to build on this site.
If I can jump in and add something too, it's not necessarily about regular vehicles, but there is a sizable bicycle parking component as part of this project in order to support sustainable modes of transportation. So whether you're taking your car to go up and hike in the weekends, or if you're taking transit to work, or in the summer if you decide you want to take your bike, the idea is to provide a multimodal split from this development. And with regards to bicycle parking, we've looked at the site and identified different opportunities to provide a 1-to-1 ratio. For secure bicycle parking. There's different parking areas, but we have a sizable number of the spaces located at the ground floor adjacent to an immediate exterior door. So we're not talking about bicycle parking where you may need to go in and get a locker and then go up the elevator. There may be some spaces like that in the parking garage for those of us who use our cycles less than others. But for those ready and who want an accessible bicycle parking, straight out the door, right onto the multi-use path, that is something that we have considered for this development, and it is included on the ground floor. So just so we know, there is obviously vehicular parking, but we have a 1-to-1 ratio for bicycle parking at the moment as well.
Okay, thank you. Quick comment from someone. We agree with intensification, but are opposed to over-intensification, which is what Uniform is proposing. 21 stories in my backyard is unacceptable. Thank you for your comment. Make sure that you're emailing these comments as well. Next question. Are these units going to be affordable housing given the policy updates Jacob mentioned?
I'll take that, Fiona. Affordability is something we think about a lot. And in today's market with rising construction costs, you know, it's a trade-off. As the project is configured now, we will have some affordable units as deemed by CMHC. What the price points were, you know, the specific units themselves, many of the smaller buildings on the perimeter will have family-size units that would be deemed affordable. So quite attractive. Overall, this is a market-based project. We'll be very competitive with you know, the competitors in the neighborhood. We'd like to think we're going to have a range of sizes that will meet all requirements, or a wide variety of requirements. So to answer your question, yes, there will be affordable units as deemed by CMHC, income requirements and whatnot.
Okay, thank you. And on that note, the next question, Jacob mentioned affordable housing as part of rationale for expanding development. What price point do you anticipate listing these units at?
Well, again, it's too early in the development and the planning to forecast specific price points. I mean, what you get into is, you know, for a price point, how big is the apartment? Offering an attractively priced apartment that's 450 square feet may not meet all requirements. So stay in touch, and we'll have more visibility as we get some market research or feedback from the public, in particular the sizes they require. We've taken a very diverse approach to designing the current suite layouts.
If I can piggyback on Dan's point, when it comes to the PPS and other policy directions with regards to affordable housing, obviously, as Dan mentioned, there is the CMHC side affordable housing criteria that would render something quote unquote affordable. But it's also important to look at the housing stock and the diversity of types of dwelling units that you would find in an area. Some people may not be suited for their existing situation and are locked out of moving into a different situation because of the availability of units. If there's a restriction on that availability of units, then typically the rents will go up. So there is a relationship between the availability, the vacancy rate, new construction, existing construction, that renders it a little more complicated. For an example, if you were to think of an existing home in the community, perhaps you have an older couple, somebody who's looking to age in place, but is no longer looking to maintain a single detached property. Providing more units in this community would help would enable someone looking to move out of that situation into something like this, where you have more accessible building criteria that would allow people to age in place, which does fit into sort of the affordable housing discussion, ensuring that there's a diversity of units so that people can find the housing that's right for them, which will help balance the market essentially.
Okay, thank you. There are a few questions. I'm not going to read each of them. Is it rental or condo? I think we've heard that it's rental. So I won't be asking each of those questions.
Sorry, Fiona, I just, as I read through the questions, the question on rental versus condo has come up a few times. And I just want to hear the developers say again, you know, what they're, if they're committing to making these rentals, if it is up in the air.
There's absolutely no plan to push forward with a condo project. We're long-term. When you build a rental project, you become part of the community. You're a long-term owner. You're vested with the residents. It's in our best interest to make the community better, and so we want to be. We want this to be a rental project. We want to be a long-term partner in the community.
Thanks. I think that addresses some of the questions that are cropping up.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Can Scott Street be extended to allow access to the site to alleviate the traffic from Winston and Wilmot? Winston is extremely narrow in the winter and almost impassable.
Well, so maybe I'll take that to kick it off. We did explore that, and for a while, and we talked to a few folks at the city, and the engineering behind it. I mean, it is possible, but the the design and the engineering technicalities and the approvals could be prolonged. And in a practical sense, from the LRT is being built out, there's going to be a bypass on those lands, up until 2025. I'm sure you all know, you've heard from the OC Transpo folks, and so in a practical sense, I don't think at this time that will work.
I'll just add on, this is something that's come up a fair bit in the comments that people are writing to me. And thank you very much, by the way. Email is absolutely the most helpful way to ask questions and raise concerns and bounce this around. So a number of people have written to me about an extension of Scott. I just want I want to say that, for many years now, the city has made a commitment that the temporary extension of Scott Street to handle the LRT detour is going to be removed. And there are three, with the cameras there, I have sort of three different stakeholder groups on that one. There's the bigger, broader community, I think, that is looking forward to that green space being reinstated with actually a fairly expensive improvement planned as green space. A nice place to cycle, a respite coming off the Roosevelt Bridge, a pleasant place to walk in order to get to and from the beach, from the station, etc. And it's, I think there's going to be a lot of community opposition to taking this space over for a road. I think there's the other stakeholder group, and I'm not sure how many are on tonight from the Tega development. They are going to be extremely patient with the LRT detour. They're going to have all the buses down the transitway going right in front of their building. They are losing trees, and I get why we're doing this. It is part of a larger public benefit interest, which is getting LRT built. But I think that they might feel significantly put out by building a road that will enable a development that people don't want. And then finally, there are the people who live in the W's, Winston, Winona, Wilmot, etc., who are raising this as a possibility. We've heard vocal opposition in past from the folks who live in the W's to extending Scott Street, and I think some of that stemmed from the fact that if you did, it would enable the kind of development that the developer is moving forward here. Depending on whether or not the development is moving forward or not, depending what council and probably ultimately the LPAT will decide. If the building is going to be here anyways, then some folks in the W's may drop their opposition to extending Scott. So it's a couple of different stakeholder groups there. I am, interested in the discussion, but we have committed to removing the extension when it's done and reinstating I believe extending Scott is something other than a road that would still allow car traffic, maybe, but it's going to be a really difficult hill to climb on that one.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Next question, why don't both buildings face the river to maximize water views?
Oh, Rial, I guess you could take that one.
Well, as you noticed in the, I don't know if it's possible to show a site plan, but it's a very long, linear site, east to west. There's physically not enough space to position them side by side facing west. But if you notice, the site is skewed. So in fact, The east building they're staggered, so the east building does take advantage of the long views towards the river. So in fact, there are waterfront units in both, or call them units with views of the water from both buildings. They are strategically staggered to follow the angular form of the site.
Okay, thank you. Has Uniform considered proposals to connect Roosevelt to Wilmot and Berkeley in order to alleviate traffic congestion on Roosevelt?
Sorry, can you repeat that, Fiona?
Yep. Has Uniform considered proposals to connect Roosevelt to Wilmot and Berkeley in order to alleviate traffic congestion on Roosevelt?
Well, no, we haven't, and it's something we could consider, and anything is possible. I mean, Jeff, what do you'd probably be able to have an opinion on the probability of that occurring?
And I'm sorry, I was answering a question in writing to another resident. What is the question?
Has Uniform considered proposals to connect Roosevelt to Wilmot and Berkeley in order to alleviate traffic congestion on Roosevelt?
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that question. Again, you know, any indication of pushing traffic off to somebody else's street is going to be difficult. I'm not sure that the property exists to do it. It's interesting. I did see the question pop up. This is going to be a months-long process of discussion between the community, the developer, the city, the planners. So I'm interested in pursuing that a little bit further, and don't want to say yes or no off the top of my head tonight.
Yeah, let us kick it around, Fiona, and we'll give it some thought for sure. Thanks for the question.
Okay. Next question. Any green technology for the development?
Again, can you repeat that?
Any green technology for the development?
Oh, absolutely. We're long-term holders, and this building most certainly will be highly energy efficient, and we look forward to. One of the characteristics of the development. I don't know if you've compared this to some of the projects on Scott Street. Well, the big differentiation is all the green space we have. This is the footprint for these buildings. While they all are tall, the footprints are very narrow. There's a lot of green space here, and we're priding ourselves, and we hope we can attract residents for that green space.
Okay, thank you. Quick comment from someone. We do not agree with this development. The high rises will block suns and views for a lot of homes in this area. Oh, and as well, how can this be mitigated?
Well, maybe we could put up the sun shadow study, and Raul could just walk you through very briefly.
Jacob, that should be in the second PDF. I don't know if you can bring that up.
Yep, I can bring it up. Just have to give me a minute.
Thank you.
Speak to the narrowness of the towers building for sun effect.
Maybe I'll read a quick question unless you're ready, Jacob.
Yeah, like 10 seconds.
Okay, well, there's a quick question. Someone's asking how many units are being proposed.
So we mentioned earlier, there's a total of currently 361 units for the entire development. That includes 38 units that are located in the low-rise portion of the development. So approximately 10% of those units are in the low-rise.
Okay, thanks.
And, you know, I don't mind starting to speak to the sun shadow. Here we go. Good timing. So I'm going to apologize for the long-winded answer, but essentially, I think Dan mentioned this already, but the narrow footprint of the towers is essentially the what we pride ourselves with this design. I mean, essentially, I talked about a 40-meter gap at the center of the site. Significant setbacks on the east side from the 7-story building. The sun moves quickly through and around the site. It's a south-facing, so we've got the major easement corridor that along the north, which creates a major separation from the buildings to the north residential neighborhood. So that's one main factor to help reduce any impact. So it's that easement corridor and the setback to the north. And then it's a south-facing site for everything to the south. So you're getting all the sunlight, no impact from that neighborhood to the south until late in the evening when you get the sunset. So the months of March, you can see where we're reaching the edges of the residential neighborhood to the north. Again, that's at high noon. And then those shadows recede as the day goes by. So there's no impact to the north whatsoever. And then I think, again, the majority impact happens in the evening around sunset for the neighborhood just to the southeast of our development. And that's in the winter solstice, and not so much in the summer solstice. So minimal impact throughout the day. We're talking about an hour here and there for different parts of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just to piggyback on that and maybe present it another way, it's important to note that the site does sit on the south side of the transitway, and a lot of those shadowing effects will fall upon that right of way, including the transitway and Workman Avenue. So those impacts, the shadows fall to the north and are mostly on municipal right of ways versus adjacent properties.
Before we move off shadows, I just noticed there is a question that just came in. Can we please see December shadow? So I'll throw that out there before moving on. Okay. The Transit Supportive Development argues elides a basic local reality. As a starting point, will you at least acknowledge that you are proposing to devastate an existing residential neighborhood by transforming Roosevelt and Winston and 3 feeder streets into essentially driveways for 350 plus residential units plus associated service traffic?
Well, maybe Jennifer, you could take that question. Again, there's a misunderstanding that people think when they hear 300 parking spots that 300 cars are going down the road at 8 o'clock on Monday morning. It's just not the case. Jennifer will take you through the traffic assumptions around transit nodes. Those assumptions come from the City of Ottawa. So maybe Jennifer, you just highlight what those inputs were.
Exactly. So when we are estimating traffic that's going to be generated by a development, there are standards that we use. And in terms of our modal split, when you're in a transit-oriented development zone, the city has specific targets that they want to see achieved. And what that results in is developments that have to do everything they can to try and achieve that. The target that we're looking for in this area is 65% transit, leaving 15% vehicle, 5% passenger, and then 15% active transportation. So that's the target for a transit-oriented development zone. What we assume for the purpose of our study, we took a look at some local data. The Trans Origin Destination Survey is something that's updated periodically. and provides local data for different districts within the city. And currently it shows us that the modal share in this area is more in the order of 20% transit currently, and 45% driver, 10% passenger, 25% active. So we take a look at the target, we take a look at where we're sitting, and the assumption that we have made for the report in terms of our weekday peak hours, when yes, people are heading out to work in various places, we assumed one split for weekdays, and we assume another split for weekends when people may be making different choices than they make during, you know, rush hour during the week. So on the weekday, we have assumed 55% transit and leaving a 15% auto mode. And on the weekend, we have assumed 20% transit consistent with the existing share and perhaps 45% auto. So we've looked at both things. And exactly, so in terms of that auto component that we have assessed, you know, we look at total trips being made by the development persons that are leaving the development or coming to it, and we break that down into each of the modes. So exactly, that the number of units doesn't translate into number of cars per se. So what it does translate into in the peak hours, based on those assumptions, in the AM, where AM or PM, it's in the order of 40 vehicles an hour. And as we've talked about, there are 2 points of vehicular access. So sharing some of it via Wilmont, actually, because Wilmont connects over to Churchill, and Winston does not connect to Richmond. And then Roosevelt, which has the signal at Richmond. Just a word about the Wilmont connection to Churchill. We know that when buses are detoured to the extension of Scott Street for the construction of Phase 2 LRT, when that happens, the city is planning to install a traffic signal at Churchill and Scott. And what that will do for Wilmont is actually create some platooning. It will pack the vehicles into groups when the light changes red or green. And so it's going to create some gaps that maybe we're not realizing today. We're still showing acceptable levels of service in place, but with the addition of that signal, it will improve as well. So that's something that's going to be done with the construction of Phase 2. So by 2022, that should be in place.
Okay, thank you. There's a few traffic questions back to back, so I'm going to stay on this theme.
Yeah, as long as I'm just looking for some new angles. If there are other questions in there that don't deal with traffic or affordable housing, I just want to make sure that we get a few different themes on the table.
There was just one question about why are 300 plus parking spots being added to these residential streets that I thought was on the
Okay. Well, the more parking, but our parking ratio is about 0.85. So essentially, for every resident, less than one car across the site. Now, we'll have a diverse demographic and resident profile. For example, if you own a home in the Westboro area and you'd like to downsize, for example, and you find this great project on Roosevelt, but we don't have parking, you know, we don't feel like we should prejudice against that particular consumer. They may only want to store their car for limited use, but they need a car at some point. Like it's so that's why we have 300 cars. Not that everybody. Again, I just want to stress that you know, there's a fear out there that people are taking their cars all the time. Jennifer's gone through the calculations. The assumptions are generated from the city. We're going to encourage people to use the LRT. We have lots of bicycle parking. You know, there is bus service also up on Richmond. We're going to do everything we can. And but I do not want to prejudice people that live in the Westboro community where they do not have a vehicle when they want to use it, even if that is infrequently or in seasonal. So that's why we have 300 parking spots.
I'd like to add to that.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say we've had this discussion a lot, and there's sort of what we consider to be a flawed perception that to be a transit user, you can't also be a car owner, that they're mutually exclusive positions. But ultimately, you know, it's been talked about how the location of this building and proximity to transit means that for me to get to my downtown job, you know, Monday to Friday, taking transit is probably most effective. But for me to go and visit my parents on the weekend, you know, I might get in my car for that particular trip. And, you know, I think it's really important for the city and for residents to realize that if we want to build transit, the transit user base, we have to shift our mentality that these two things are mutually exclusive. They do not have to be. It's about convenience, effectiveness, and options.
If I can add to that point, I think it's important to recognize that as a market-based project, the developer is responding to the needs that they've identified for projects of this type in Ottawa and in this community. But obviously, they are planning to stay long-term. This is a rental project, and they will be involved as stakeholders in this community for time to come. And if those market-based realities shift, then the developer would be looking to shift their provisions, right? So if the day comes where not so many parking spaces are required because the LRT is up and running the way the city wants it to be, it's a big investment, and we want to make sure that units are developed in these areas. But if people start really taking the LRT and leaving the cars behind, that's not really what we're finding is the reality right now. But should that come to be, these are spaces that can always be repurposed at a later date, whether the developer decides to turn them into underground storage spaces for the units or amenity areas or whatever it is. It's just space that right now is being allocated for what we said is vehicle storage so that we can provide that multimodal split. But as market-based realities shift, so do the realities of our buildings.
It's a shift that takes a lot of time. It's a behavioral shift, and you know, we're in the infancy of that behavioral shift in the city of Ottawa. And so, you know, for that reason, as a developer, you sort of have to best address the current situation, knowing that there's flexibility and nuances to this discussion. Yeah.
I mean, lastly, no one's really touched on this, but this is also, the size of this development isn't all going to happen at the same time. It's a phased approach. So as Jacob and Dan have talked about in terms of building out this parking infrastructure, it's not all going to happen at once. And we have analyzed how we can sever the site, build half the site out in parking, build the first building, and then come back later, reassess. And if the parking demand isn't actually there, then there's no point in building that parking.
Okay, moving on.
If I may, Fiona.
Yeah.
Fiona, if I may, sorry. I just wanted to say I've answered a question with on traffic, because that is a large number of the questions that are in the queue right now. By uploading the developer's traffic study, which is now uploaded to the same website, the kitchissippi.ca website, where we advertise this open house. So I've uploaded that PDF, and there is a link which you can use as long as the session is going on to find the developer's traffic study. It's and then of course over the course of the next couple of months, you know, you'll have the opportunity to pose lots of questions of the planner on the file, who will farm it out to the traffic team to start really delving into the weeds of that. Certainly, traffic is the probably the biggest consideration after how did we get to the point that this application is even moving forward, that has come through on my email so far. So if you do want to take a look at the traffic study and begin to you know, critique that in depth, it is now available on my website, which is a whole lot easier to find than on the city's website.
Thanks, Jeff. I've also just put the link to that blog post in the chat, and I just note that the traffic study, it's at the bottom of the blog post as you're looking for it. Okay, regarding the height of the application, the decision of the OMB set the maximum as up to 8 stories. Given that the current application is even higher than the previous one that was refused, may I ask what the rationale is for ignoring the clear order of the OMB?
That's a great question. Brian, you can take that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in on that one. Hello, everybody. It's Brian Casagrande. I'm one of the partners at FO10 Planning and Design. Jacob's been doing a fantastic job, so I've been sitting back listening. But this particular question is an important one, right? And Uniform asked it of us really right at the beginning of being retained on this file. You know, the question was pretty much, you know, should we build to the height that we were awarded through the OMB and save ourselves the time and you know, the challenge, if you will, of going through these types of, and the cost of these types of amendments. And they put that question to me, and my, you know, my very, I guess, emphatic answer was no. I think it would have been a missed, and it would be a missed opportunity. And I think it's going to be a missed opportunity on 2 fronts. I think this proposal, you know, and I hadn't seen it yet, but I envisioned it in my mind's eye at the time, just knowing that Barry Hoban's office had been involved with this project and would be going forward. I said that, you know, this can be a better designed project, a much better designed project than you'll see with a very, you know, ominous 9-story, 8-story, I should say, walled building. And I said, you know, the other opportunity, of course, is an opportunity for intensifying at a site where there aren't very many near this future LRT station. There really aren't too many around here that you can, you know, obviously point to and say, well, that's where we're going to get the type of density that an LRT station in a world-class city truly deserves. So those 2 things in mind, I challenged them to also see if they could widen the base of the site in terms of its ownership, because, excuse me, in going higher, there's a natural interest, I guess, on a planner's part to improve the transition to the surrounding area. And by increasing the ownership around the property, as you see with the 3-story low-rise development around it, you know, we've been able to get that type of transition. And to be honest, you know, I've been on most of the files that have gone through the city recently for approval along Scott Street. And I don't see this site as profoundly different than those sites, because if you look at it, the northern edge condition of the site, even though it's just a transit station and a pedestrian pathway instead of a road and a transit station, is similar. You've got a substantial separation between any residential on the other side. And so that really does create an edge condition all the way along the transit station. And then if you create transition in terms of ownership along the southern edge, well, you have basically the same sort of situations that we're seeing on all the projects that have been approved along that corridor. So for me, it wasn't profoundly different. The only key difference was that the policy considerations were, in my view, outdated at the time that this application came through the first time, and they weren't properly addressed before the application flowed through the approval process and eventually was handed to the OMB at the time. So, you know, we're pausing and we're looking at this now and saying, let's go about this the right way. But for me, it was all about design first. And, you know, you heard Rael talk about the fact that we have 55% open space around these buildings. The R5 zoning, which is your typical high-rise zoning in the city of Ottawa, stipulates a minimum of 30%, and most projects struggle even to get to that. So, you know, really what you, in my mind here, is there's about a 25% increase in the as-of-right density in that 8-story built form on the property. So largely, this is about taking that density and squishing it upwards so that at grade, we can provide the type of open space, tower separation Rael mentioned was 40 meters. Like, you know, typically we're striving to get 20 on other sites of this nature. So, you know, the urban design and the openness of this project is so substantial in my mind to what the alternative would be that I have no problem, and I know Jacob has no problem in throwing our weight behind this from a planning perspective, because all of those key principles you'll find in the city's latest urban design guidelines for high-rise housing and all of their policy considerations that have been evolving since the last project was approved.
Would anyone like to add anything before I move on? Okay. I truly wish you could respect the 8 stories. You say you are a partner or friend of our community. What benefit for our community is there in this development? How will existing neighbors benefit?
Well, I guess I'll start off. First and foremost, Brian just highlighted the open area, the connectivity through the site, and the visual appeal at the ground level. I think there's many characteristics that will enhance the neighborhood. You know, there seems to be a misconception out there. When people talk about intensification, they feel their property values will drop. And it's totally unfounded. And in fact, most cases, you find that property values actually go up around intensification. So the bringing this project to life is going to help the Richmond Road corridor, all the merchants are on that street, and just stimulate the neighborhood. New people entering, I know that's uncomfortable, but we think this will improve the neighborhood. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, I'd like to jump into it with respect to the secondary plan. So the maximum height schedule C2 currently denotes 8 stories, and obviously that is a result of the Ontario Municipal Board decision. But if you take a look at some of the other sites in the area, the secondary plan, which was drafted in 2009, which predates the funding or the construction of the LRT, envisioned a height of 10 stories at the site of 250 Lanark, which is situated at Westboro Station. So that site was identified for 10 plus stories. There's a clear identification in the secondary plan for high-rise buildings being located adjacent to transit. Now, in that document, Dominion Station as a current BRT station is probably a little different than the Westboro situation, but when this upgrades to a full LRT station with the investment the city has made, we're fully expecting that everything part of that Line 2 or Phase 2 project is going to intensify and densify to help make that investment on behalf of the city worth it. So the secondary plan, as is from 2009, currently anticipates high-rise buildings adjacent to the other transit site in this community. So a mid-rise building of 8 stories, a mid-rise bar building achieving a certain density is not necessarily the best design approach. We have clear indication that high-rise in this area is generally favored towards transit-oriented development and sites located next door. And as Brian already mentioned, there's not a lot of opportunity next to Dominion Station for major redevelopment without significant lot consolidation. This is really a site that could have been identified specifically in the secondary plan, and I believe there was language specific to it, claiming that this is an intensification opportunity in proximity to Dominion Station. So while things have significantly changed since the secondary plan was conceived in 2009, even at that point, it acknowledged that high-rise development next to transit is appropriate. So that's why we're proceeding with the high-rise building on this site. To develop something at 8 stories with a particular density, when we can shift that density and move it up, is simply a better design consideration. It's also important to note that the bar building type design would help prohibit some of the open space and connectivity that we're presenting through the site. By having a 40-meter separation between the 2 towers, you're enabling that extension of Winston right through to the multi-use pathway, which helps improve the overall connectivity of the area, which further reinforces the transit-oriented development that we're trying to produce.
Thanks, Jacob. I'd like to add a little bit of content to that from a design perspective as well. Just in terms of massing, building mass, when we were comparing an 8-story building, and this is Westboro, so I'm gonna poke a little bit, but there's a recent development that everyone is familiar with on Richmond Road, the convent site, which looks at a 9-story building envelope, which is essentially a wall effect, and it spans from the schoolyard all the way to the next block. And I'm pretty sure that probably exceeds the 150-meter mark, if not 200 meters. But there's essentially three buildings merged into one wall. And what we're talking about is with an 8-story mass is essentially the same effect. And when you look at the environment that's created around this building, with the wind shear coming off of a wall building, and then you compare it to what we're looking at, where we have 40-meter building footprint, a 40-meter gap, and then a 40-meter building footprint, which is a lot like, if you look at, without looking at height, if you look at Westboro Station, just a little further south from our site, and our development there on Richmond Road and Roosevelt looks at, again, 3 buildings with building gaps in between, which actually help from a wind shear perspective. They allow access to sky plane, sunlight, sun shadowing around the site. An 8-story mass is only as good, you know, when you're from a distance, but if you're actually living up against that site, 8 stories versus a 4-story podium with a building step back and then gaps in between the towers is not, in our opinion, is not the answer. And you know, the benefit of doing the high rise of smaller footprints, I mentioned the city has a guideline of about 750 square meters, which is, you know, close to 8,000 square feet, just shy of 8,000 square feet. We're at 6,500 square feet on the footprint of those towers. So we dramatically reduced them in comparison to city guidelines. We doubled the gap in between the buildings, created, so we mentioned 55% open space around the buildings, but the reality is that's been reduced because of the acquisition of the low-rise buildings on the back. But if you take the original boundary of the site, without those low-rise buildings, we actually exceeded 65% open space just for the towers themselves. So a lot of effort has gone into trying to actually create a sense of openness and allow these high-rise structures to knit in the neighborhood using these elements, the gaps, the footprints, and not only that, but we're acknowledging the LRT station by providing a marquee that, you know, is visible from a distance, that actually acknowledges the fact that this is actually a transit-oriented development. So all of these things we're really conscious of, and it is a better, we think, is a better solution than an 8-story wall, which would have the same density as what we're proposing today.
Okay, thank you. Just checking in with everyone. It is 8:34. I have 98 questions in the queue. So we'll go to 9. We won't get everyone's questions in, unfortunately. So if your question is missed, again, just to reiterate, please email us afterwards, jeff.leeper@ottawa.ca, your question, and we'll make sure that you get that information. Question for Councillor Leeper and Mr. Gauthier. It's a pandemic. Telework is changing dramatically in the National Capital Region, possibly forever. Why are we considering permitting inappropriate high-rise zoning and inundating Westboro with condos when the demand is not even likely to continue for condos? Jeff, you're muted.
It's an interesting question, and one that planners, politicians, residents right across North America are obviously seized with at the moment. And for those of you who are following such things, you'll remember that in the first month of the pandemic, there was a lot of discussion about we need to stop our thrust toward intensification. We should even be allowing more urban sprawl because people are going to want more space. Transit considerations are no longer important because people are going to move further out, and they're not going to need to commute to work. And that discussion lasted for maybe a month or so. The general thinking that you see around the planning world right now, or at least that I'm seeing around the planning world, is that the general thrust toward intensification is still critical. People need to live near high-speed transit, not just for work, and obviously thousands and thousands of Ottawans are going to go back to work in their offices, but for school, for getting around the city, for all kinds of utility reasons. We need to live near our grocery store and not drive, because beyond the pandemic, The one thing that we absolutely do know is that the car-centric planning of the last 60 years has led to a climate crisis. And we know a lot about the climate crisis. We know that if we don't get our greenhouse gases under control, that we are going to make this planet uninhabitable. And the way cities can address the climate crisis is by intensifying. So that is a thrust that in every jurisdiction across North America continues, despite what we've seen with respect to the pandemic. And then the other big thrust that we have is we need to build more housing. And I'm going to talk here about the crisis in affordable market housing. We have two different affordability issues. One is the deeply affordable housing for those who will never be able to afford market housing. And we need thousands and thousands of units of that. And it's going to be up to government to build those. We need provincial and federal help. And you've seen my frequent communiques on that issue. But with respect to affordable market housing, we have a 1.8% vacancy rate in Ottawa right now, so that younger professionals are spending $1,800 a month for a one-bedroom apartment in neighborhoods where they can hope to live without the expense of a car. I don't know how many folks here have hung around the building that Taggart built at Rosemount. It's like a 16-story, and then there's a 6-story condo below. And the folks who are in that building, many of them are living without cars. They don't have cars because they live in Hintonburg, right? They can walk everywhere. They've got amazing LRT access. They take part in car share. They're biking around. And, you know, that garage generates almost no traffic. If you stand next to the Rosemount Library all day, Connaught Public School, it's the school and the library and the healthcare center that create traffic. The residential facility creates almost none. The only way that the young people today are going to be able to afford to live in neighborhoods like ours is if we build more housing in neighborhoods like ours. When the vacancy rate is 1.8%, that means that our neighborhood is exclusive. It means that our neighborhood is unaffordable to almost anyone. I can't afford my house in Hintonburg anymore. It has quadrupled in value in the past 20 years. I'm sorry, I don't want to take over the entire meeting. The twin affordability and the climate crisis challenges have been looked at through a pandemic lens, and intensification continues to be the planning thrust in every sophisticated jurisdiction in North America. So the thrust of the new official plan that concentrates on 15-minute neighborhoods, that concentrates on starting to break up the really strict use of you're going to work kilometers from where you shop, which is kilometers from where you live. We're breaking that down in order to create those neighborhoods, and the focus on transit is huge. So that's where planners and politicians right across North America are today. Sorry, that's a lot of words. It's a long discussion.
I understand the question wasn't addressed to me, but if I could have 20 seconds, I just want to say thank you to Councillor Lipo for echoing that comment, because as a young professional in the city and as somebody who started his career here, the affordability was an issue, especially early on. I'm still a renter. I still rent downtown. I try to minimize my car trips as much as possible. But the vacancy rate definitely needs to get back up to a healthy level. A healthy level is sometimes talked around 3.5% to 4%. And ensuring that we have a supply of units to balance that supply and demand is kind of where we're going to get to that level. So just thank you for saying that.
And I also want to say, I want to address something that Dan said at the beginning, which is that the thrust of the official plan, or the thrust of planning thinking, is to intensify the core. And that rubs me, and it rubs residents uncomfortably. The the city's thrust right now is to intensify with these tall buildings virtually everywhere where there is an LRT station and on every major transportation corridor. For those of you who haven't taken a look, check out the blog posts that I have up on the website right now with the developments that are being proposed for our ward. What you see is that in Tim Tierney's ward and in Teresa Kavanaugh's ward and in Riley Brockington's ward, the same thing is happening. The developers have taken their cue from the official plan and they are developing along the major transit corridors. The big question for me in this one is, this is not an arterial street. This is a different context from the buildings that have been put along Scott Street, the buildings that are proposed for Carling Avenue. It's a different context from the buildings that have been, that are going in today at Blair Station that you can see as you drive out to Orleans. It's a different context from the buildings that we're approving in Orleans, next to Place d'Orleans, from Bayshore, from Lincoln Fields. I don't think, despite the city's thrust to intensification near transit, that we should be just turning it into a Wild West of all intensification is good. And I think that, once you get past is the secondary plan still appropriate in light of the official plan discussion, which is question number one that council is going to have to seize itself with. Then you get into, okay, if the secondary plan does need to change in order to accommodate the most recent official plan thinking, is this development at the size and the density it is it appropriate for the context of being not on an arterial street, where the traffic is going to be coming out on small residential streets, where it is surrounded without arterial road by very low-rise residential housing. So that's sort of the second layer of discussion that happens. And even if the city continues to, our city and cities across North America continue to consider intensification as the most important thrust to address housing and climate emergencies that are declared all over the place, does this development necessarily work in this context? I'll leave it there.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So 2 construction questions back to back. I'm going to read them both and then make a comment and then turn it over to the panelists. How long is construction going to last and when would it start if it were approved? And second question, how long are you going to blast for? How much are you going to protect the existing houses on the street? My house is beside this and I want to know what damage is going to be done to my house. I do want to add, should this development be approved, there will also be a condition in the site plan approval. And I'm sorry, I don't know if site plan is coming at the same time as zoning. But no, it's not. I saw Jacob shake. So when we go through site plan, we will add a specific condition for a pre-construction meeting with the community so that the concrete information and timelines will be that are known at that time and shared. So things like where the truck traffic is going to go, when the blasting is going to occur, the high level timelines, like the milestones that they're going to be hitting with the build, the phasing, because it's a 2-tower project and other things. So we will make that a condition in the site plan to have that in the future. But I'll turn it over to the panelists to address the questions.
Okay, Fiona, I'll take that. The first thing I would tell you is that for your concerns, there'll be a pre-blast survey done of all the homes in the area. So we will monitor throughout the excavation and observe anything that's happening adjacent to your house. These are procedures that we have, regulations we have to follow. And I guess the next thing is, as Riel had mentioned earlier, the project will be phased. Most likely the East Tower will commence first. The total project is about a 5-year project in its entirety. At the earliest, we'd be starting in 2022, late 2021, depending on how the approvals go. And yeah, 3 to 6 months of excavation, depending how much of the garage we were to do in the first phase.
Okay, thank you. Okay, a comment. I'm someone who is directly affected by this project, and I want to acknowledge it's a beautiful proposal done thoughtfully. There are some improvements that could be done. Let's take a moment to talk about the positive feedback coming, including my own. Okay, thank you. Just give me a second. There is 100 questions still, so I have not actually read every single one of them. If this goes ahead as a rental unit, what guarantees do we have that there won't be a shift later on? We see developers change their original proposal after the fact all the time. Perhaps a question for Jeff, as I know he's been fighting that fight.
It's a fair question. There are no guarantees. I think what I would, the city does not regulate what they call the tenure. So the city does not regulate whether it is rental or whether it is condominium. What I would say is that with current vacancy rates in the city at this location, this developer will probably end up having a high-end product that they will make some good money off of for years and years to come. I think the market incentive is there for them to keep rental today, and they can disagree with me, but clearly they're going into rental. Turning a rental project into a condominium, filing the plan of condominium, all that, dealing with the tenants who are already in the building is a challenge for a landowner. I am confident that if this starts as a rental, that it will probably remain a rental for the foreseeable future. I don't know, Dan, if you want to speak to it. The more likely scenario would be to see Uniform decide it doesn't want to be in rental and sell it to a REIT.
Well, today as I said before, we're a long-term holder, and we see we're going to be a partner in this project for many years to come. Given the history of this project, we've made a substantial investment, and you can see by the scope of the design, we spent a lot of time, and we're very serious about the project. So again, I've said it several times tonight, but we're a long-term partner in this community.
Councillor, it's Barry Hogan here. Procedurally, you'd have to declare if it was going to be a condo in advance for condo approval. You can't convert a rental into a condo after the fact, unless the vacancy rate, well, it has happened in the past, but the vacancy rate would have to rise to 7 or 8%, right? There are conditions under which that could happen, but that's not likely to be the case. If there was going to be a rethinking of it, it would be during the planning and implementation stage as opposed to after the fact.
If the vacancy rate rose to 7 or 8%, rents across this city would be significantly more affordable, and I would be significantly less concerned to maintain it as a rental building. I can only imagine what the rents would be today for folks like Jacob and Fiona if we had a 7% vacancy rate. Okay, thanks.
I don't want to know. Why is this allowed to start before the LRT is complete? For Jeff.
Sorry, that's a good question, and one I'm raising with staff. I don't know how this can start before LRT construction. The developer may have had some further conversations and perhaps Steve, I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot. You're here to listen, but my understanding was that, LRT construction is sacrosanct and nothing can interfere with that.
That's my understanding. Sir.
Thanks, Steve. Does Dan, do you have any reason to believe differently?
Well, we've had some preliminary discussions with the folks at OC Transpo, and we think we can work together. The bypass will be ongoing for some time. We're set back from the final trench location where the trains are going to go. So to answer the question, we should be able to work with the folks at OC Transpo to meet our objectives.
Okay.
Both objectives.
So stay tuned. That's an ongoing discussion then.
Okay. What type of barrier will they wear? Sorry, I'm getting tired. What type of barrier will there be between your property and the surrounding houses? A wall, a fence? How tall will it be?
Well, there'll be construction. So did somebody?
Go ahead, Dan.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you see it around town. It's quite elaborate. The hoarding that it's known by, the covering of the sidewalks, a large wall essentially is put around the site.
As it's being built.
Yeah, and I mean it's all done up front, and normally it's very safe. I'm not aware of any problems in the city of Ottawa.
Were you, Fiona, were you asking about the final design of the barrier or during construction?
I believe I'm reading the question verbatim, but I believe it is for the final design.
Oh, okay.
So basically a combination of wood privacy fence and landscaping trees are considered for the edges of the property that are bordering onto residential properties, and then more of an open treatment along the public realm where we see low shrubs with a sort of an ornate privacy fence to kind of delineate private from public spaces, but again lined with greenery so that it doesn't become the predominant interface between the public realm and the buildings and private property.
Sort of building here on the streets.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking for a final question. I don't know if Jeff has spotted one he wants me to get in. Sorry, just give me 1 second.
While you're looking, I do see a question about do any developers and designers live in this community? And I'd just like to say that I recently moved away, but I lived there for 7 years in a condo in a recent development in the community, and was quite, appreciative of the mix of housing types that existed in the neighborhood. I thought it made for an interesting diversity of demographics. Walking the streets, you always sort of bump into seniors, kids. It was a really enjoyable, people walking their dogs. And I can see the way that we've approached the site is really to promote that kind of interaction within the community. Aside from the height, the parking and the cars, I just want to say that a lot of effort has gone into the design of the site so that it promotes this kind of interaction. It allows people to filter through the site. People are walking their dogs or the kids are playing. That major public open space that's in the center of the site provides for a multiple variety of activities that could occur. You can actually condo board or a rental board, can plan to put some basketball nets out there, in the summer, wheel them away when they need to, but bring them in. I mean, there's a ton of activity that could occur for both the private residents that live in that space, as well as people flowing through with their bikes and interacting, sitting on a planter. Anyhow, it's been thought about. I mean, the north edge condition, how it interacts with the animated space on the ground level. All of these things are meant to provide for a comfortable space to walk through and experience throughout the year. So I'm happy to say that I've lived there, and these attributes are important, and the different house types are also important to allow for a diverse mix of people living in the community.
Fiona, I won't bore you, but I was born in Westboro. went to Churchill Avenues Public School, Broadview, Lanark High School, which was down. So I have a deep history in Westboro, and I should mention that Uniform has a deep history in Westboro. The first project we ever did with them was the Oaks O'Allen Park, which was on Clearview. They did St. George's Yard, which is just east of Allen Park Drive. They did the avenues on Melbourne and Edison, and in fact are completing their last phase of that site, which is taking over the old Sisters of Jeanne d'Arc. And to their credit, were instrumental in facilitating the Cornerstone Shelter of Women to transfer to the old Jeanne d'Arc Mother House. In fact, they played an important, as did I, important development role in facilitating Cornerstone to come to Westboro and providing supportive housing for women. They have a big footprint in this neighborhood. I think what most people don't realize is that they haven't done a high rise here, but they know the low rise stuff. And I think it's important when you evaluate the footprint of a developer like Uniform is to walk around and look at those projects and look at how they engage with the street. Because just coming back to this proposal, both the low rise development that faces on to Winston, Wilmot, and the PODIUM, which faces along the walkway, are really important definers of urban life. It's not the tower which will define urban life, it'll be the base of those buildings. And I want to make the connection between the work that we have done in places like St. George's Yard, even the project we did in Edinburgh, McKay House, and the avenues. These other projects are really important in terms of the level of detail that we bring to what happens at the ground plane. And that to me is the biggest shaper. I have the same opinion, same approach to a project that Councillor likes in Westboro that we did for Taggart 1140 Wellington, because the base is really important. It's what animates the space, even the public space from that. And I just reflect to the councillor. I know the councillor has had to, I'm going to say, endure. You mentioned the various applications that happen along Scott Street of towers associated with transit and Scott Street specifically. A lot of them. Like, let's be fair. I don't know. It's almost tiring, the number of towers that occur along here. And then the councillor made a point that this is different because it's not on Scott Street. I will agree with that. It's not on Scott Street, but I will also tell you that none of those other projects include low-rise, street-oriented, like the 3-story we're building as part of the transition. Brian mentioned that earlier, and the notion of kind of transition and making a place for it. None of those projects do, because they're all concrete frame and they're looking for maximum density. So there's no interest in actually doing anything that's low-rise as part of the project. Anyways, I'll shut up. I just want to make a point. I want to make a strong point. As you walk around the city, what we appreciate about the city happens in the first 3 or 4 stories. So if you're looking at Westboro Station, or you're looking at Stella Luna at 1140 Wellington, or you're walking to the Glebe or Hindenburg, most people don't see beyond the 2nd or 3rd floor. That's what they focus on. That's what's important. It's part of this design piece, so that the pieces at the top are really slender and narrow and small, so that you focus on what's happening at the ground plane. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. The open house doesn't lend itself either in person or virtually to debate. I'm sure we could do this all evening, but we do have 2 other questions, I guess, that we want to get, and then we'll wrap it up. I thank the participants for their patience with our extending the time on this one. Fiona?
Yeah, okay. Comment, and then I'm going to comment on the comment. You say you're looking for long-term holders, but apartment building occupants are not long-term holders and will not integrate well with the community. I just want to say, and I think we've talked about this a little bit, there's 2 people on this call who are young professionals who live in apartment buildings, and I would argue are both integrated in their community in different ways. I know my building, it's 8 units, and it's filled with young professionals from architects. One of them works for Roslyn Hill, who's another local architect that some of you may be familiar with. One of them's a PhD architect student, consultants, like they're all young professionals. So this idea that long-term rental occupants aren't invested in their community, I think is no longer true. And I like to use myself as an example, but as well for a period of time, my parents, who are adults, were also renters in Westboro and are very much a part of their community. They're also listening to this call tonight because that's how invested in their community they are. So I always use myself as an example for that at some point in these conversations. And I just wanted to say that, and I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Thanks, Fiona. And yeah, the worst thing that can happen to our neighborhood is that it become exclusive. With the property values are only going to rise further and further beyond the reach of most people in this city, in our ward, and we will not be as strong a ward as we could be without the diversity that a broad number of people come in. I do want to make sure before we sign off, because I've got a request of the planner. Tony has asked a couple of times, putting the this development in the context not just of the W streets, but of the low-rise development that is across the transitway in Westboro Beach. We don't have a lot of perspectives of what that looks like. The materials that have been put in front of us this evening kind of, they don't show that. And I know some people are questioning, and I'm questioning, is this actually an edge condition? Like we normally see tall towers in. And so what I'm hoping is that Steve can work with the development team to get some good perspectives into the package that show, the full context, including Westboro Beach and including the various different perspectives that we need. So that's it. That's. I apologize. We're going to cut it short now. I normally say the same thing after these. The open house is a good opportunity to get information and answer your questions. The real work now begins. This is going to be several months of back and forth between you and me and the developer and the city. That is, give some thought to what you've heard here. If there are things that you're unclear about, ask me or ask the planner in terms of factual answers, and get your feedback in by email. I need to craft my arguments in terms of the planning law that's in effect. So do residents. There are a number of interesting questions that have come out from me this evening that I'll be thinking more about. But otherwise, please do start writing your emails with further questions. This is just the beginning of the discussion, and for several months from now, we'll continue to be debating and discussing this proposal before it finally goes to a planning committee vote in 8 or 9 months or a year or something like that. So thank you very much to the development team. I know you face these tough questions, and I appreciate your doing so for tonight. And thank you very much to the participants for coming out. And we will have this open house posted to our YouTube channel sometime within the next few days. Fiona, fantastic.
By next week at the latest.
Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.